In a bold and defining moment for Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré has unveiled a $500 million investment plan spread across the next 5 years. But this isn't just about figures on a budget sheet, it's a sacred vow. A national promise carved in memory of the blood, sweat and sacrifice of those who gave their lives for the country's freedom. From colonial occupation to modern-day invasions, masked as foreign aid and terrorism, Burkina Faso has endured wave after wave of oppression, but now, under Traoré's leadership, the tide is turning. This financial commitment isn't merely development, it is the resurrection of a nation's soul. A significant part of the funding is being directed toward honoring national heroes, those forgotten by the history books written elsewhere. The graves of fallen revolutionaries, anti-colonial warriors and unrecognized martyrs are being restored. Monuments are rising not to glorify foreign conquerors but to celebrate indigenous resistance and pride. For the first time in decades, the national narrative is being rewritten by the people themselves. President Traoré's government is making deliberate moves to restore cultural identity, language and indigenous values that were long suppressed. The education system is undergoing radical change, shedding Eurocentric content and introducing history from the African perspective. Children now learn about the real heroes of their soil, not colonizers, but the sons and daughters of Burkina Faso who dared to resist. Local languages are being reinstated in schools and public administration. Statues of colonial figures are being removed. Museums that once celebrated European explorers now feature exhibitions on native leaders and their struggles. This isn't revisionism, it's reclamation. One of the boldest components of Traoré's national revival is the aggressive push for economic independence. Decades of reliance on foreign aid have trapped the country in a cycle of dependency, where loans come with conditions that benefit donors more than recipients. That cycle is now being broken. Burkina Faso is nationalizing strategic resources, starting with gold, manganese and agricultural land. Foreign contracts that exploited the nation's wealth while contributing little to local development are being reviewed and in many cases cancelled. New deals are being struck on Burkina Faso's terms with African partners or emerging nations that respect mutual sovereignty. The slogan now heard across the country is simple but powerful. Own what we produce, control what we own, and the people are responding with energy not seen since the revolutionary days of Thomas Sankara. Agriculture, once neglected in favor of foreign imported solutions, is receiving renewed attention. Burkina Faso is revitalizing its land through indigenous farming techniques, agroecology, and investment in smallholder farmers. Communities are being encouraged to return to traditional crops, resilient to the local climate and more nutritious than imported staples. Grain banks and cooperatives are being formed across rural areas, giving power back to the people over what they grow and eat. This is not just a food program, it's food sovereignty. The new education policy prioritizes African philosophy, history and science. Young Burkinabe are no longer taught to imitate Western ideals, but to innovate within their own realities. Schools are shifting towards teaching trades, engineering, and sustainable development with a local focus. Education is no longer about escape, it's about empowerment. It's about teaching a generation that they can build a future right where they are. One student from Ouagadougou said it best: before we were trained to leave, now we're learning to stay and lead. The Burkinabe military is also being transformed from a force dependent on foreign intelligence and aid to a community-rooted institution built on self-defense and civic service. Local defense groups are being incorporated into the official military structure. Training is now focused on guerrilla tactics, terrain mastery, and cooperation with civilians. No longer seen as an elite institution removed from society, the army is now viewed as a protector of the people. Military spending has been restructured to support local arms production, security tech and logistics, creating jobs and reducing reliance on Western suppliers. Burkina Faso is defending its territory, not for empire or external validation, but for its own survival and dignity. Perhaps one of the most profound changes is the spiritual shift sweeping through the country. Traditional African belief systems, long demonized and sidelined, are being re-embraced. Ancestral altars are returning, sacred groves are being protected, indigenous rights are no longer seen as backward but honored as essential pillars of community life. The people are reconnecting with their spiritual identity, not as folklore, but as guidance. It's a silent revolution, one not covered in international headlines, but one that is shaping the country's heartbeat. This isn't reform, this is rebirth. Burkina Faso, under Traoré, is redefining what it means to be free. Not just from military occupation, but from psychological colonization, economic bondage, and cultural erasure. It is forging a new model, not capitalist, not socialist, but African, rooted in its own history, responsive to its own people, and resistant to foreign domination. The world may not yet understand what's happening in Burkina Faso, but across Africa and increasingly across the global south, eyes are turning toward Ouagadougou, not with pity, but with respect. What President Traoré is building is not perfect. It is not without challenges. But it is something rare in our times, a people reclaiming their destiny. Burkina Faso's internal transformation is not happening in isolation. It is sending shockwaves across the African continent and far beyond. The nation's rejection of neocolonial control, its cultural revival, and its focus on historical justice are inspiring other countries to re-examine their own struggles with post-colonial dependence. President Traoré's movement is both symbolic and strategic. It is laying the groundwork for a new type of African leadership, rooted not in borrowed systems or foreign approval, but in ancestral pride, indigenous knowledge, and economic self-sufficiency. Across the continent, people are paying attention. From Senegal to South Africa, from Mali to Madagascar, leaders and citizens alike are watching the Burkinabe example with a mix of curiosity, admiration, and hope. This is no longer just a national story, it's a continental call to action. The vision coming out of Ouagadougou is awakening something long dormant in Africa, a sense of shared destiny. More than ever, African nations are beginning to ask, why do we continue to rely on former colonial powers for economic survival? Why must aid come with chains? Why are we still exporting raw materials and importing dependency? Burkina Faso's struggle has become a mirror in which many other African countries now see their own reality reflected. For decades, the narrative has been the same: aid in exchange for compliance, loans in exchange for policy control, and development tied to foreign agendas. But now that narrative is being challenged loudly. And while some governments hesitate to follow Traoré's path, fearing economic retaliation or diplomatic isolation, others are beginning to quietly adjust. Sovereignty is becoming a popular word again, so is self-reliance. This is the early heartbeat of a new Pan-Africanism, not the theoretical dream of a united continent, but the practical work of reclaiming what was lost, stolen, or forgotten. President Traoré's leadership has done more than expose the scars of colonization. It has transformed them into sources of strength. The restoration of burial sites and the repatriation of fallen heroes is not just about honoring the dead, it is about empowering the living. These acts carry spiritual weight, reconnecting people with their history in a way that makes their current struggle feel purposeful, not aimless. In cities and villages, families speak the names of ancestors that were once forgotten. Children learn of heroes beyond textbooks. Communities gather to celebrate not just independence, but identity. This emotional reconnection is building unity where division once thrived. Ethnic differences, once exploited by foreign powers, are being bridged by a common cause. Traoré is not ruling by fear or propaganda. He is leading with purpose, and the people are responding. But outside Africa, the reactions have been far more complicated. In some circles of the international community, Burkina Faso's defiance has been labeled dangerous. Certain Western governments and global institutions express concern about stability, governance, and security risks. These terms, while cloaked in diplomacy, often mask discomfort with the loss of influence and access. The country's decision to challenge multinational corporations, particularly in the mining sector, has triggered pushback. Western media frequently frames Traoré's administration as confrontational or authoritarian, minimizing the legitimate grievances of the Burkinabe people. Meanwhile, others, including grassroots organizations, diasporas, and thought leaders across the global south, applaud the country's efforts. They see Burkina Faso not as a rebel state, but as a vanguard, a nation daring to write its own story. This divided reaction speaks volumes about the current global order. and why it must change. One of the most remarkable elements of this transformation is the surge in civic participation. Young people, long alienated from politics, are now leading conversations. Civil society groups are forming alliances across sectors. Artists, educators, and community leaders are reclaiming public space and public discourse. The streets of Burkina Faso are no longer filled with apathy. They echo with activism. There is now a widespread demand for transparency, accountability, and national policies that prioritize Burkinabe needs over foreign interests. People want leaders who serve, not those who surrender. And this energy is contagious. It is shifting the political landscape from one of dependency to one of defiance and destiny. The road forward is anything but easy. The country still faces threats from violent extremist groups, political friction, and economic constraints. It remains vulnerable to the pressure of international creditors and powerful foreign lobbies. But there is a clear difference now. The people are no longer waiting for salvation. They are creating it. Security remains a top concern. So does economic diversification. But the foundation has been laid, a population that believes in itself, a government that listens, and a movement that no longer begs for validation. Burkina Faso is standing on its own feet, and it is inviting the rest of Africa to do the same. This moment isn't just about one country, it's about the future of an entire continent. The crisis Burkina Faso is overcoming is one shared by many. The challenge of building a sovereign, self-reliant state in a world that still treats Africa as a resource depot. Under Traoré, Burkina Faso is becoming a model, not because it has all the answers, but because it dares to ask the right questions. It dares to dream, and most importantly, it dares to act. This is a country that has taken control of its narrative, its resources, and its direction. In doing so, it has become a torchbearer for nations that still hesitate